Holy shit, would you take a look at these patch notes? It's gonna take me all afternoon to read them. You better appreciate it, or you're gonna face justice.
Borderlands 3 patch notes, hotfixes. There will be a link down in the description box if you want to read these at your own leisure, which I recommend because I don't know if I'm going to survive reading through all of this. Remember that hotfixes are applied when you're at the main menu and you see a sign that says hotfixes applied. You need to be connected to the internet for that. Actual updates are embedded into the game. New content added support for the new free content being added to the base game of Borderlands 3 Takedown at the Guardian Breach. Resident Iridian expert Patricia Tanis has discovered a mysterious Guardian signal on the distant planet of Minos Prime and has asked you to investigate it. Why do I do that? I don't know. Fight for your life improvements. Added cooperative reviving. When more than one person is reviving a downed player, the player will be revived faster. This is only supported for cooperative players. Yeah, because if you're not being cooperative, you're just not going to be revived, period. You're going to be kicked while you're down. Slowed the movement speed of downed players who are actively being revived by a cooperative player. Increased the interactive radius around downed players to make it easier to start reviving them. Added visual effects to the downed player being revived and the player reviving the downed player to help visualize the act of reviving. Added support to show mayhem levels on item cards. Stability addressed a reported concern where some players could experience a crash after being kicked 3 times in a row from a host's game. Also addressed a reported concern of a crash that could sometimes occur after a client respawns in the mission Angels on Speed, Angels and Speed Demons in Conrad's Hold. Don't ask. Also a concern of a crash that could sometimes occur when engaging with enemies with the Wedding Invitation, with the Galaxy Brain Mayhem modifier active. We'll talk about crashing the wedding. Wedding crasher? Anyways. Addressed a reported concern of a crash that could sometimes occur when the host entered combat at the beginning of the 4th round in Cistern of Slaughter. Addressed several reported crashes. I'm glad that they didn't list every single one of them out. Could be here till Christmas. Optimizations, improved performance when navigating vending machines. UI optimizations for consoles, improved inventory performance, quick menu, main menu, item inspection, buddy widget, mod tutorial, memory by removing unnecessary frames from the skill tree menus. Improved performance when dragging and dropping items in the inventory menu, or concern that players would sometimes experience a noticeable frame rate drop when navigating the character menu and split screen. Addressed a reported concern that performance would sometimes... It says some things, but it's a typo. Little bastards are trying to trip me up on my words. A reported concern that performance would sometimes drop after picking up the Echo log during the Demon in the Dark in Conrad's Hold. Did you see what I did there, by the way? That's what you call cringe comedy. It's supposed to be cringy. It's not supposed to be funny. Improved HUD performance. General. Addressed a reported concern that the camera would sometimes tilt sideways when using a high fire rate weapon and strafing. At the same time. Disabled all controller input when the game window is not in focus on PC. Disabled access to the quick menu when players are in vehicles or turrets. Addressed a reported concern that an outrunner can sometimes be launched into the air and out of playable space when a user enters the vehicle in Meridian Metroplex. I'll make sure if you give the video a thumbs down, when you go back home and you're like, oh, I'm finally home, you get launched into outer space. I'm just saying. Addressed a reported concern that the bodies of dead enemies would sometimes stretch when inside the elevator in Conrad's Hold. Hey, you're lucky that's not what you're getting. Addressed a reported concern that the host player can escape the map when crouching in the doorway of a client's room when they leave their session in Sanctuary. Addressed a reported concern that hitting an out-of-bounds area with a vehicle would trigger FFYL. Adjusted the cost of ammo at vending machines to derive from the player's level instead of the vending machine's level, or a concern that pinstripes and filigree were sometimes missing from some player skins, or a reported concern that the anointment 300% damage above 90% didn't work properly with non-flesh enemy types. A reported concern that Guardian perks would only be considered active during the session you unlock them in, or addressed a reported concern that elemental puddle decals would sometimes remain for clients when reloading the map while the puddles are present. Updated credits, I'm now in there. Added previous hotfixes to the game, addressed a reported concern where the hint bar would appear spaced out and stretched across the bottom of the screen in the skill tree menu, or that the play button in the echo log menu would sometimes be displayed incorrectly. Borderlands Science added a 10-second cooldown timer until a player can request to skip the current puzzle and get a new one in Borderlands Science. Addressed a reported concern where the Borderlands Science booster could be removed when joining another game session. Character addressed, that an operative's action skills and anointed effects can be affected by another action skill when activating two action skills at the same time. Added an in-world for EchoCast, an in-world marker to improve the discoverability of Moxtail's chest in-game, or an issue with the EchoCast where Moxtail buff was lost when joining another game session, or a concern with EchoCast where the rare chest winner count stat was incorrect. FX addressed where smoke or steam would flicker in Sanctuary after extended gameplay. That was just you not being able to handle the heat. It was actually your brain that was smoking and flickering. Mayhem 2.0. Rebalanced Mayhem stats for enemy health, shields, and armor in Mayhem level 7, 8, 9, 10. Mayhem levels 7, 8, 9, 10 have had their stat bonuses to health, shields, and armor reduced. On Mayhem 10, the bonus is now 10,000% instead of 12,500, and the curve from level 7 to 10 has been adjusted accordingly. Made a change so only the host player can roll or apply modifier changes to Mayhem, or that addressed a reported concern that the Agonizer 9000, the Kraken, Wotan, and Esta were sometimes not spawning Mayhem level gear. While we wait for chests and vending machines to support Mayhem level gear in the next patch, as stated in our Mayhem 2.0 dev update, these enemies were fixed so they support Mayhem as a stopgap. The Mayhem modifier's Mob Mentality and Chain Gang can no longer be rolled together. The Mayhem modifier floor is lava, now fires off less frequently, and the damage taken no longer counts towards keeping the player in combat. The Mayhem modifier Chain Gang now creates beams when the player is closer and dissipates when further away, allowing them to fire less frequently. Optimize combat timer refresh for Mayhem. The 4 changes above were made to keep Mayhem 2.0 running smoothly, and we will continue to monitor the performance of Mayhem 2.0 and make adjustments in the future. The Boundary Issue and Drone Ranger Mayhem modifiers are continuing to go through testing and are not going to be turned back on at this time. Addressed a reported concern that players would sometimes not load incorrectly after throwing grenades and making changes to Mayhem mode, or that the travel countdown timer would sometimes not display the map name when applying Mayhem modifier changes after the player activated a new U station that was not a fast travel station, or that the numerical indicator on the Mayhem pedestal would not display properly after adjusting the level, or that the UI for the boundary turret warning would remain on screen when changing Mayhem settings while in a restricted area, or that the enemy death from the post-mortem Mayhem modifier was unable to cause damage to Moses' auto bear or to the player in Iron Bear's gunner seat, or that the enemy death from the post-mortem Mayhem modifier would circle in place if spawned from an enemy that the player did not take down. Added a limit to the number of visual impact effects spawned when projectiles take damage with post-mortem and freeze tag Mayhem modifiers. Post-mortem, Healy Avenger, and freeze tag will now check for the dying enemy's allegiance relative to the player when deciding if they should spawn. Addressed a reported concern that the player could be briefly put into FFYL when the Mayhem modifier roguelite is active. Addressed a reported concern that beams spawned from the Boundary Issues Mayhem modifier could sometimes become visually attached to the player. Addressed a reported concern that beams spawned from the Boundary Issues Mayhem modifier could sometimes stay attached to the player after defeating an enemy NPC turned friendly. Addressed a concern that a beam effect would sometimes not trigger from the Boundary Issues Mayhem modifier if there was an obstruction between the player and the enemy, or a reported concern that some heads were sometimes not scaling properly with the Galaxy Brain Mayhem modifier active, or that the Mayhem modifier abilities would occasionally not run properly on enemies, or a concern with weapon drops from enemies down via critical hit while the loop explosion mayhem modifier was active, sometimes not always matching the current mayhem level. Vehicles can now be the targets of mayhem modifiers. UI addressed a reported concern where D-pad glyphs to change the tracked mission were still displayed on the HUD when playing with the classic button scheme, or where an empty prompt would be displayed on the HUD above the experience bar after spending skill points, or where multiple message slideouts would appear and overlap after disconnecting a controller, or where the speed of the UI menu would vary when adding a split-screen player, or where the client's countdown would not appear on the screen after accepting a dual invitation, added improvements to text chat, updated hint text for changing the viewed event to change viewed event, addressed a reported concern that parts of the HUD would sometimes be missing when quickly pausing and resuming the game. Hotfixes. This week we have a variety of gear balance changes as promised in the Mayhem 2.0 dev update, and hotfixes specifically for takedown at the Guardian breach. To get the changes and avoid seeing any of these issues arise, make sure that you have your hotfixes applied at the main menu. To apply hotfixes, wait at the main menu, like I said, until you see a sign-in that says hotfixes applied. If you are experiencing any issues or want to provide feedback, you can go ahead and do so. Added Revenge of the Cartel anointments to the permanent drop pool for gear. Addressed a reported concern that spikes from Manticores and Korax ignored Zane's barrier. Rebalanced the number of enemies active at one time during takedown at the Guardian breach. Rebalanced the health of some enemies during takedown at the Guardian breach. Addressed a potential progression blocker when fast traveling during takedown at the Guardian breach. Addressed a concern with the operatives SNTNL not targeting enemies in some cases. Weapon adjustments. As stated in the patch notes, we have adjusted the health, shield, and armor stats of Mayhem levels 7 and higher. As part of that change, we need to adjust gear to reflect that. With the decrease in enemy health, shield, and armor in later levels of Mayhem, all the gear you have currently will feel more effective as you take down enemies in those higher levels. SMGs have proven to be one of the most popular weapon types, so we focused on them with this update. We decided that this amount of change was all we were comfortable with when paired with the scaling changes. We'll observe player feedback over the coming weeks and likely make further adjustments as needed. Weapon buffs. The number of visible SMGs felt low compared to the relative depth of weapons of that type. As a result, several of them have had their damage increased this week. Increased weapon damage on Bitch, Handsome Jackhammer, Devoted, Cloud Kill, Tsunami, 10 Gallon. An increased melee damage bonus on Ripper. And increased weapon damage on Vanquisher, and increased bonus damage while sliding on Vanquisher. There's been some weapon nerfs. We found that a few pieces of gear were overperforming. Blah blah blah, so they nerfed the Sandhawk. It was creating too many particle systems, which we found creating an issue related to performance. It's also creating too much damage relative to other sniper rifles. So the following changes have been made. Increased shot cost from 2 to 3. Removed 2 projectiles, increased the accuracy spread, lowered lifetime of projectiles, increased projectile speed. Yellow Cake. I am speeding through this because I do have to go soon, like big time. We discovered an unfortunate issue with the Yellow Cake that was effectively adding an extra 100% damage beyond the intended output. We're fixing it today. So changed the damage scaling on that. The Coasin was providing more power than intended. Accuracy and pulse was increased. Max accuracy increased, but critical damage reduced. Base damage decreased. Anointments buff. We're not providing enough value, effectively making them non-viable for players. In an effort to increase the build diversity, we're buffing a number of anointments. Airborne anointments. Slide fire rate, action skill end, auto bear active. Thank God that's over. So if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, go ahead, give it a thumbs down, and I'll just break it off in your ass. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, I mean, naturally that would be great. But if not, thanks for stopping by anyways. Take care, boys and girls, or whatever it is you identify as, and as always, hopefully I'll see at least some of you in the next video. Bye now.